What you're about to hear are 4 terrifying stories. Tales that blur the line between nightmare and reality. From haunted woods and cursed villages, to tunnels that whisper and lakes that watch you back. Each story carries a darkness you may never forget. But be warned, once you listen, you might never sleep the same again. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the horror begin. Story 1. As dusk began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, Sam built a small fire near their tent. The flames danced merrily, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. Sitting opposite him was his best friend since childhood, Louis, who was busy flipping through a worn-out book. They were alone in the forest, miles away from civilization. This annual camping trip had become their thing. But this year, something felt different, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. An unnatural quiet had fallen over the place. The chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves, the symphony of the forest, was missing. A chill wind suddenly swept through the clearing, extinguishing their fire and sending shivers down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Louis asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sam shook his head, but he, too, was unnerved by the sudden silence. Just then, a loud crack echoed through the trees. Both men froze, their eyes darting around in the darkness. Was it just a branch falling, or was someone or something watching them from the shadows? As they sat there, listening intently, more cracks followed, slowly getting closer. Fear tightened its grip on their hearts. What was out there in the darkness? Was it a wild animal, a human, or something more sinister? The suspense was palpable, each creak of the trees sending fresh jolts of adrenaline through their bodies. Then they heard it again. Footsteps, heavy footsteps that seemed to be circling their camp. Panic surged through Sam. He grabbed a nearby stick, his hands shaking. Louis, pale as death, held on to the book, his eyes wide with terror. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. Whatever was out there was now just a few feet away from them. A low growl sent shivers down their spines. It was a sound that spoke of raw primal power, of teeth and claws and eyes that gleamed in the dark. The growl rumbled closer, vibrating in their very bones. Suddenly, 2 glowing eyes pierced the darkness. They were like burning embers, cold and merciless. The eyes stared directly at them from just beyond the tent, and for a moment the growl grew louder, then abruptly stopped. Terror lent speed to their movements as they fled into the forest. The pursuer crashed through the undergrowth behind them, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground. They ran blindly, crashing into each other as they struggled to navigate the unfamiliar terrain. Their lungs burned, their legs ached, but they dared not slow down. Not when the sound of their pursuers' breathing was hot on their necks. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a dirt road. Relief flooded through them as they realized they had reached the edge of the forest. Just a little further and they would be safe. But their respite was short-lived, for emerging from the trees was a large, dilapidated house. It looked like it hadn't seen a human in decades, yet there was a faint light shining from one of the windows. Driven by desperation, they knocked on the door. It was old and weathered, but beneath the peeling paint, Sam could make out strange symbols that seemed almost otherworldly. The door creaked open, revealing a dark and dusty interior. Stepping inside, they found themselves in a large hall. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. But there was no one in sight. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, they noticed a set of stairs leading to the upper floor. Taking a deep breath, they decided to explore. As they moved through the rooms, they saw strange markings on the walls, patterns that seemed both ancient and sinister. Each room they explored was more unsettling than the last. One room had chains hanging from the ceiling, suggesting unspeakable acts committed within its four walls. Another room had bloodstains on the floor, a grim reminder of violence long past. They finally reached the source of the light, a single candle flickering on a table. In the center of the room was a massive tome bound in what appeared to be human skin. Its pages were filled with disturbing images and strange symbols that seemed to writhe and twist before their eyes. The candle flame sputtered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. The room seemed to be growing colder, and a sense of dread settled over them. Suddenly, the whispers started. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Feel the pain," they hissed. "Embrace the darkness." Terror froze them in place. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Just when they thought they couldn't endure another second, the whispers abruptly stopped. Struggling to regain his composure, Sam turned to Louis, only to find his friend staring blankly ahead, his face drained of color. The book lay open on the table between them, its pages fluttering despite there being no breeze. The candle flame flared, illuminating the grotesque faces carved into the book's cover. They seemed to mock them, their eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Louis didn't respond. His eyes were wide and unfocused, as if he was seeing something that Sam couldn't see. "Louis," Sam said, his voice tight with concern. He reached out to touch his friend's shoulder, but as his fingers made contact, he recoiled as if he had touched a burning hot stove. "Don't," Louis whispered, his voice hollow and distant. "Don't touch the book." Sam stepped back, his heart sinking. What had happened to Louis? Why did he react so violently to his touch? Had the whispers taken something from him? Before he could question Louis further, the whispers began again, slithering through the room like venomous serpents. "Give in," they hissed. "Let the darkness consume you." Louis flinched, as if the whispers were nails scraping down a chalkboard, grating against his already frayed nerves. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination to help his friend, Sam grabbed the book and rushed to the window. The night was dark and stormy, the perfect cover for their escape. But as he looked out into the raging storm, he saw that the road leading to the house had vanished. In its place was a thick, impenetrable fog. Trapped, Sam turned back to face Louis, but his friend wasn't there. Panic surged through him. Where had he gone? Had the whispers lured him away? He called out for Louis, his voice echoing through the empty house, but only silence answered him. He raced through the house, flinging open doors and ripping down curtains, desperate to find his friend. But Louis was nowhere to be found. As he searched, he noticed more of the strange symbols carved into the walls and furniture. They seemed to mock him, their meaning just beyond his grasp. Then he saw it, a loose floorboard in one of the rooms. He knelt down and pried up the board, revealing a dark hole beneath. With a mix of apprehension and determination, he began to descend into the darkness. The musty smell of old earth filled his nostrils, and the air grew colder as he went deeper. At the bottom of the hole, he found a narrow passageway. He could feel the dampness seeping into his clothes as he moved forward. The passage opened up into a small chamber. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a book bound in what appeared to be human skin. It was the same book they had seen in the house. As he reached for the book, he felt a sudden shift in the air, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He turned around and gasped. Standing in the doorway was a creature from his nightmares. It was tall and slender, with skin like stretched leather. Its eyes glowed red in the dim light, and its teeth were long and sharp like the fangs of a snake. It took a step towards him, and he could see more clearly the grotesque details of its face. Its nose was twisted and bulbous, its ears were pointed and elongated, and its mouth was filled with rows and rows of sharp teeth. The creature let out a low growl, and in that moment, Sam knew he was facing something truly evil. In a panic, he grabbed the book and ran, stumbling over rocks and roots as he fled. He could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind him, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground. Just when he thought he might collapse from exhaustion, he saw a faint light in the distance. With a surge of adrenaline, he raced towards it, the book clutched tightly in his hand. As he approached, he could make out the shape of a house. Relief washed over him as he realized he had escaped the clutches of the creature. But his triumph was short-lived. As he stumbled onto the porch and raised his hand to knock, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a woman with a kind smile and gentle eyes. But it was her gaze that truly held him captive. Her eyes seemed to peer into his very soul, seeing all, knowing all. She beckoned him to enter, and as he stepped inside, he saw a roaring fire in the hearth and a comfortable sitting room. It was everything he had dreamed of after his harrowing escape from the House of Whispers. And that's where we end our story for today. Please subscribe if you want us to continue Story 2. It all began one rainy afternoon in the village of Oakhaven. My father, the chief of police, sat slumped at his desk, weariness etched deep into his shoulders. The town had seen better days. Its glory as a trading hub had faded with time, leaving behind a shell of its former self and a population that seemed stuck in a mire of apathy. I, his son, Daniel Hawthorne, had recently returned after years of study abroad, hoping to breathe new life into this sleepy town. Yet even I couldn't shake off the pervasive gloom that clung to Oakhaven. One case, however, offered a glimmer of hope amidst the grey. An old woman had vanished from her home without a trace. This wasn't your average missing persons case. Mrs. Emberley had been more than just a resident. She was a living archive of the town's history. Her disappearance felt like the loss of an irreplaceable artifact. My father, burdened by the mystery and perhaps by the weight of his own responsibilities, had asked for my help. My investigation led me to the heart of Oakhaven, where the bustling market square had once stood. Now it was a desolate expanse of cracked pavement and crumbling brick, a silent testament to the town's fading glory. A lone figure stirred in the stillness, an old man hunched over a table piled high with books and papers. He introduced himself as Jeremiah Blackwood, the closest thing Oakhaven had to a historian. From him, I learned about the town's most prominent landmark, the Whispering Gallery, an abandoned railway tunnel carved beneath the market square during the town's heyday. According to local law, the tunnel had been sealed off decades ago due to structural concerns. Officially, it was deemed unsafe and a potential hazard. But the townspeople spoke of a darker reason for its closure, attributing its abandonment to strange occurrences that defied rational explanation. Driven by a mix of skepticism and intrigue, I decided to investigate. My first attempt to locate the entrance was unsuccessful, yielding nothing but frustration and a growing sense of unease. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the deserted square, I met back up with my father at the police station. His face was creased with worry, mirroring the troubled state of our town. Together, we pored over old maps and documents, seeking any clue that could lead us to the tunnel's hidden entrance. Our search culminated in the discovery of a faded, almost forgotten map in the town's archives. It depicted the market square as it had been decades ago, complete with the location of the now vanished Whispering Gallery. The next morning, armed with the map and renewed determination, I set out once more. The rain had ceased, but the sky remained overcast, lending an air of melancholy to the already somber town. Following the map's faded lines, I arrived at a spot directly beneath what had once been the market square. The cobblestones here were slightly misaligned, forming a near-perfect circle. And as I stepped into the center, the ground beneath me gave way. I found myself descending into a dark and narrow tunnel, the very entrance to the long-lost Whispering Gallery. As I descended further into the earth, the air grew colder, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and something else, something indescribable that pricked at the back of my throat, a premonition of unease. The tunnel was pitch black, the absence of light making the space feel both alien and suffocating. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal the rough-hewn walls of the tunnel. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant drip of water, each drop echoing like a drumbeat in the confined space. As I ventured deeper, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that seemed both ancient and otherworldly. Their presence hinted at a history far older and more complex than Oakhaven's residents had ever imagined. I continued on, my resolve wavering as the oppressive darkness pressed in around me. Bend. In the distance, I heard it, a whisper, soft and unintelligible, yet undeniably there. It seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, weaving tales of sorrow and despair. Suddenly, the tunnel widened, opening up into a cavernous chamber. My flashlight struggled to pierce the gloom, but enough light managed to filter through to make out the shape of a vast cavern. its ceiling lost in the darkness above. In the center, a single shaft of light illuminated a doorway carved into the far wall. Drawn to it like a moth to a flame, I walked towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could reach it, however, a voice, raspy and ancient, echoed through the chamber. "Beware, traveler, for the path ahead is fraught with peril." I hesitated, torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the gnawing fear that urged me to turn back. But curiosity, that relentless companion, pushed me forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the doorway, disappearing into the unknown. The space beyond was like nothing I had expected. Instead of a continuation of the tunnel, I found myself in a vast chamber filled with an array of bizarre contraptions. Gears, tubes, and devices that seemed like fragments of some mad scientist's workshop. In the center of the room stood a large metallic sphere, pulsing with an eerie green light. It hummed with an otherworldly energy, its presence both fascinating and terrifying. As I approached the sphere, the whispers intensified, swirling round me, their voices growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of power, of knowledge, and of a terrible, terrible price. Overcome with a sudden surge of adrenaline, I reached out and touched the sphere. In an instant, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. Images flashed before my eyes, fragmented memories of a time long past. I saw a bustling city, advanced technology, and a war unlike any I had ever witnessed. Then, just as quickly, it was over. I stumbled back, shaken and disoriented, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. But before I could, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, cold and merciless. "So the bloodline continues. Interesting." I whirled around to face the source of the voice, my heart hammering against my ribs. Emerging from the shadows was a tall, gaunt figure, his face obscured by the hood of his robe. In his hand, he held a staff that seemed to absorb the surrounding darkness. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the vast chamber. The figure merely smiled, a chilling, mirthless expression that sent shivers down my spine. "A guide," he rasped, his voice like the scraping of metal on stone. "A guide to the power that awaits you." Before I could respond, he gestured with his staff, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. The metallic sphere in the center of the room pulsed with renewed vigor, bathing everything in its sickly green light. "Embrace your heritage, Daniel Hawthorne," the figure whispered, his voice echoing with amusement. "Embrace the power that flows through your veins." And with those words, everything went black. I awoke to the sound of sirens, their piercing wails splitting the night. Disoriented, I tried to sit up, but a searing pain in my head forced me back down. As my vision cleared, I saw that I was lying on the floor of the Whispering Gallery, the metallic sphere dormant in the center of the room. I was safe. Or so I thought, for as I struggled to my feet, my gaze fell on a nearby puddle, reflecting the twisted, grotesque features of a face I knew all too well. It was me, or rather, it was an image of me, but not me. There was something in the depths of those eyes, something reptilian, something that spoke of an ancient evil stirring within. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. The sphere had chosen me, binding me to its malevolent purpose. Whatever power it offered, whatever darkness it promised, it was a fate worse than death itself. As dawn broke, casting the first rays of sunlight into the tunnel, I stumbled back to the surface, leaving behind the whispering gallery and the horrors it concealed. But as I emerged, blinking against the bright light, I knew I would never be the same. The battle for Oakhaven, for my very soul, had just begun. Story 3. Some places in this world are best left alone. Places steeped in legends so old, the truth has been lost to time. Locals will warn you, of course. They'll tell you stories whispered from one generation to the next, tales meant to keep you safe, to keep you away. But some of us, some of us are just too stubborn, too arrogant to listen. We think we know better. That was me and my best friend, Chris, one fateful summer. We thought we were just going on another camping trip, another adventure to add to our collection. We had no idea we were walking into a nightmare from which only one of us would return. We'd heard about this lake tucked away deep in the woods, miles from any town. It had a name, but everyone just called it the Cursed Lake. The stories were all different, but they all had one common, chilling warning. Never look into the water after midnight. When we rolled into the dusty little general store for supplies, the old man behind the counter took one look at our camping gear, and his friendly demeanor vanished. He repeated the same warning, his voice low and serious. You boys best find another spot. That lake, ... It watches. We just laughed, thanked him for the advice, and paid for our things. Curses, watching lakes. To us, it was just local folklore, a ghost story to make our trip more exciting. We couldn't have been more wrong. The hike to the lake was beautiful. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of leaves above us, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. By the time we arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting a fiery orange and purple glow across the sky. The lake itself was breathtakingly still, a perfect dark mirror reflecting the vibrant colors of the twilight. It was serene, peaceful even. We set up our tent, built a crackling campfire, and as darkness fell, we grilled some hot dogs and told old stories, our laughter echoing across the quiet water. The warnings from the town felt a world away, like a half-remembered dream. The moon, full and impossibly bright, rose high in the sky, turning the landscape a ghostly silver. As the fire dwindled to glowing embers, we checked our watches. It was 12:30 a.m. Well, Chris said with a smirk, it's after midnight. Guess it's time to face the curse. He was joking, but a part of me felt a flicker of unease. The woods had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an unnerving, heavy stillness. But my curiosity, that dangerous human trait, was stronger than my fear. Come on, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Let's go see what this is all about. We walked to the water's edge. The surface was impossibly smooth, like a sheet of polished black glass under the moonlight. It didn't ripple, It didn't move. It was just there. I was the first to lean over. I expected to see my own reflection staring back, the familiar sight of my face haloed by the moonlight. But that's not what I saw. The face looking up at me had my features, my hair, my eyes, ... But it was wrong, horribly wrong. The skin was pale, almost translucent, like someone who had been submerged for a very long time. The eyes were dark, hollow pits of emptiness, and the mouth was twisted into a grotesque, silent grin that sent a spear of pure ice through my veins. I physically recoiled, scrambling backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped my lips. "What is it? What did you see?" Chris asked, his voice laced with a nervous excitement that quickly turned to dread when he saw the look on my face. Before I could form a coherent word, he leaned over the water himself. His gasp was sharp, cutting through the silence. It's not just one," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Look." I forced myself to look again, my eyes drawn back to the horrific mirror. The lake's surface was no longer a single reflection. It shimmered, and beneath the glassy sheen, dozens of faces were staring up at us. Men, women, children, all of them pale and waterlogged, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths stretched open in silent, unending screams. Their hands, wrinkled and white, pressed against the underside of the surface, as if it were a glass wall they were desperately trying to break through. It felt like we were looking down into a liquid grave, an aquarium of lost souls. We were frozen, trapped in a state of pure, primal fear. Then the impossible happened. The perfectly still water rippled, not a gentle ripple from a breeze, but a violent disturbance from below. Something broke the surface right in front of Chris. A hand, bloated, green with rot, with peeling skin and black fingernails, shot out of the water. It was impossibly fast. It latched onto Chris's ankle with a grip that had to be like iron. He let out a single, piercing scream of terror and agony that was cut off with a sickening gurgle as he was yanked off his feet and dragged under the surface. The splash was loud in the silence, and then nothing. The lake was calm again, perfectly still, as if nothing had ever happened. I screamed his name, scrambling to the edge, my hands plunging into the icy water, searching blindly for him. But there was nothing, just the cold, dark liquid. I looked down, my tears blurring my vision, and I saw them. The reflections, the silent, screaming faces were still there, but now there was a new one among them. Right at the front, his face contorted in the same silent agony as the others, his hand pressed against the invisible barrier. It was Chris. His eyes met mine from beneath the water, pleading, screaming, trapped, and next to him, my own reflection stared back, no longer grinning, but weeping silently from its watery prison. I ran without looking back, the silent screams from the lake echoing not in the air, but inside my own head. I never stopped running. I don't know how I made it out of those woods. The sun was rising when I stumbled onto a road, disoriented and hysterical. No one believed my story. How could they? The official report listed Chris as a drowning victim, a tragic accident. They searched the lake for days, but they never found his body. I know why. He's still there. They're all still there, trapped beneath the surface of the lake that watches. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and the world is quiet, I can still see their faces when I close my eyes, and I can still see Chris screaming silently, forever a part of the cursed collection. So, if you ever find a place with a story, a place with a warning, listen, just listen. Don't be like us. Don't let your curiosity be the thing that drags you under. Some reflections are not your own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoy tales of suspense and the unexplained, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know. Stay safe out there, and remember to always heed the warnings of the locals. Story 4. It's late at night, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but your face is haunting me. The end of the story I just read really creeped me out, and actually reading it now, I can see why. So if you would like to hear some other scary stories that hopefully won't haunt your nightmares, then stick around for more. I got my first tattoo when I was 18 years old. It was a little star on my ankle, done in red ink. Back then, I thought it was super cool, but now it just looks stupid and childish. But I didn't care, because back then I wanted more and more tattoos. I already had my next design picked out. I wanted something small and cute, so I chose a little butterfly. My mum hated it though. She said butterflies are only cool for girls. So I couldn't get it until I moved out. I worked all summer to save up enough money, and as soon as I had it, I booked an appointment. I went to the parlor and showed the guy the picture of the butterfly. He looked at it and then told me he could do something similar. He said he had this new style of tattooing called fractal flash, where he draws freehand and uses different colored inks. Apparently, it takes more skill, and you can't copy someone else's work. Still not sure what that has to do with a butterfly, but I trusted him and sat down. As he began to draw, I noticed the designs on the wall. They were beautiful. There were birds, flowers, and animals, and every single one of them was different and amazing. I asked if I could look at his book, and he nodded and handed it to me. As I flipped through, I saw that every single page was filled with these beautiful, unique tattoos. Then I saw one drawing that stopped me cold. It was the exact same tattoo I had picked out, the butterfly. This time, it wasn't just a regular butterfly. It was a huge monarch butterfly, and it was swarming with hundreds of little bats. I asked the artist about it, but he just shrugged and said he didn't know anything about it. I paid for my tattoo and left without saying a word. To this day, I wonder who got that tattoo and why. I was driving home from a long trip. I had been on the road for days and I was exhausted. The GPS had led me onto some very isolated roads. It was well past midnight and I was starting to feel very uneasy. Suddenly, a deer ran across the road. It leaped into the air and landed on top of my car, directly on my windshield. Of course, I slammed on the brakes and the deer went flying. I knew I had to check and make sure it was okay, but I couldn't get out of my car fast enough. When I came back from the front of the car, I saw a second deer looking at me from the passenger window. I screamed and floored it, making it go away. Was I dreaming? Had I imagined the whole thing? Was there any way that a deer could survive a 60-mile-an-hour collision? I stopped at a gas station to calm myself down. That's when I noticed that my windshield wipers were completely destroyed and covered in blood. I don't want to know how something that size could have survived that fall. My family used to camp every summer. One year we decided to take a canoe out onto the lake and camp on an island overnight. After setting up our tent, we began exploring. Not far from our site, we discovered an old rusted metal box buried in the sand. Out of curiosity, my dad pried it open. Inside, we found a worn leather journal and a small, tarnished key. The key must have been ancient. It was covered in dirt and had no markings. What were we going to do with it anyway? It was too big for anything in the house. Dad put the journal in his backpack and locked the box again. We all agreed that we would read the journal that night after dinner. Unfortunately, there was a storm and we had to stay in our tent. Once inside, we lit a flashlight and opened the notebook. It was filled with strange symbols and writing. Most of it was illegible, but one phrase kept appearing over and over again. It was written in multiple places throughout the journal, and it said, "They will be here soon." Dad tried to reason with me and told me it was just a camping story gone wrong. I know that now, but that night, every time the wind howled or the trees swayed, I thought they were coming for me. Every year we take the kids trick-or-treating. It's our favorite thing to do together. Our son is 4. Our daughter is 7. We try to pick costumes that match. Last year, our son was a little lion and our daughter was a witch. This year, they both wanted to be superheroes. The only problem was they wanted to be different superheroes. I thought it was funny. My wife did not. She insisted they should be the same. After much arguing, we finally agreed that our son would be Batman and our daughter would be Batgirl. Then our daughter changed her mind again and wanted to be Superman. So I said she could. Then our son started crying because he didn't want to be Batman anymore. Finally, we gave in and let him be Superman too. We spent hundreds of dollars on their costumes, and I have to say they both looked pretty adorable. All the neighbors loved them. They even won the award for best matching costumes. But I could tell my wife was disappointed. Now, whenever we talk about Halloween, she gives me the silent treatment. And just last week, she said, "Next year, I think the kids should dress up as something different. How about pirates?" A few weeks ago, I was taking my daily walk by myself, since my husband was working late. It was a dark, cloudy day, and most of the neighborhood was asleep. As I walked past one house, I noticed that the living room curtains were moving slightly. I thought it was odd because I had seen the family leave earlier that day. Maybe someone had broken in. I didn't think much of it and continued my walk. A few moments later, I noticed the curtains moving again. I decided to turn around and check it out. The movement seemed to stop as soon as I turned around. But then I realized that the curtains weren't moving at all. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I quickened my pace. Then I heard a voice say, "Hello there, I jumped and whirled around, but there was no one there. It was the creepiest thing ever. I quickly walked the rest of the way home and locked all the doors. I didn't want to tell my husband because I didn't want him to think I was crazy. But that night, while my husband was sleeping, I listened intently for any sounds. My mum was convinced that my brother and I were being haunted when we were kids. I never believed her until recently. My brother and I grew up in a big Victorian home. It was old and creaky, with squeaks and groans that made it sound like the house was alive. Growing up, my mum would tell us that certain rooms were off limits because they were haunted. She said that we should never go in there because whatever haunted those rooms didn't like people. Of course, we didn't listen, and we would sneak into those rooms. Nothing ever happened. Years passed, and we eventually moved out. I never thought about those rooms again until recently when I was cleaning out my mum's house. While walking through those same rooms that were off limits, I noticed that the doors to those rooms had names on them. One said Sarah and the other said William. I asked my mum about it, and she told me that those were the names of the ghosts that lived in those rooms. She said they were siblings who died in the house many years ago. She said that sometimes she would hear them playing in the hallway. Well, my mum was right. One time I was staying in a hotel room alone. I was on the second floor, and the room was above a busy pub. The walls were paper thin, and the sounds of chatter and glasses clinking floated up to my room. It was incredibly annoying. Around midnight, I began to doze off, but then suddenly there was complete silence. I assumed everyone had left the pub. A few minutes later, I heard what sounded like a woman's scream, followed by a loud crash. I immediately got up and turned on all the lights and checked the windows and the door to make sure they were closed. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Then I noticed that the television was flashing. I turned it on and switched to the local news channel. It reported that a woman had fallen off the roof of the pub and was rushed to the hospital. Turns out the noise I heard was her hitting the pavement. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, please leave a like and consider following for more. Until next time, remember to stay safe and watch your back. The Silent Village.